Good morning and welcome to the morning devotion here at Mount Gilead Church. My name is Mike Bridgewater and I'm the operations director here at the building. It's Friday, February 5th, 2021. And I thought I was going to be able to get through the rest of chapter 6 and into chapter 7 this week, but as I read these last 8 verses of chapter 6, I realized there's just some great little nuggets in there that I wanted to dig into a little bit and look at. So we're going to do that today. Let's remember from last week, after the writer of Hebrews had given the readers a little bit of a scolding, he gave them some great encouragement, and he desired 3 things from them. And he said he wanted them to persevere, not to become sluggish, and to be imitators of those who went before. So let's read through the end of chapter 6, starting with verse 13. I'll read this here real quick. It says in 13, "For when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear an oath by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, 'Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply you.' And so, having patiently waited, he obtained the promise. For people swear an oath by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath serving as a confirmation is an end of every dispute. In the same way, God, desiring even more to demonstrate to the heirs of the promise the fact that his purpose is unchangeable, confirmed it with an oath, so that by 2 unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to hold firmly to the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and reliable, and one which enters within the veil, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." So let's take a closer look at some of these great little nuggets in these 8 verses. In verse 13, he says, God made the promise. God's promise to Abraham is like a multifaceted gemstone. I would encourage you today to go back to Genesis 12, where the initial promise was made to Abraham before he left Haran, to go to the land of Canaan, and then later in Genesis 22, after Abraham has taken Isaac to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him, the angel of the Lord stops him. The promise is repeated. And just look at all the different things in that promise. There's so much in there. And then go to Romans chapter 4 and see what Paul had to say about this promise to Abraham. It's very interesting. In chapter 15 it says, having patiently waited. Now they're talking about Abraham here. And Abraham waited for decades. He was 75 in Genesis chapter 12. He was 100 when his son Isaac was born. And he was probably another 15 years later when Isaac was a young boy that he took him to Mount Moriah. So he literally waited 30 to 40 years. I don't like waiting at a stoplight. I can't imagine waiting decades for a promise to be realized. In verse 18 it says, we who have taken refuge. The we here is us. The Hebrews had what is known as refuge cities. And there were 3 of them on the east side of the Jordan River and 3 of them on the west side of the Jordan. And basically, if you were wanted for manslaughter, you could flee to one of those cities. And you can read about the terms and conditions of the refuge cities in Joshua chapter 20. We as believers, though, we have taken our refuge in Jesus. In verse 19, it says, anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and reliable. I just love this saying, anchor of the soul. It's become one of my most favorite sayings. Jesus is the hope, both sure and reliable, an anchor of your soul. It's a steadfast anchor. It's secured in heaven. Anchors are a symbol of safety. When a ship is in a storm, it'll put out its anchor and hopefully ride out the storm instead of being blown around uncontrollably by the wind. Take refuge in Jesus. Seize him. Hold firmly to the anchor that is secured in heaven. In verse 19 it says, which enters within the veil. The veil the writer is referring to is the one which separated the holy place from the most holy place within the tabernacle and the temple. You can read about this in Exodus chapter 26. It is the same veil that was torn from top to bottom during the crucifixion, the implication being that the barrier between God and man has been removed by Jesus. And in verse 20 it says, entered as a forerunner for us. This is the same word we learned about in chapter 3, the pioneer. Jesus has blazed the trail within the veil for us to follow. Under the law, only the high priest could go on the other side of the veil, and then only once a year during the Day of Atonement. Now through Jesus, our sure and reliable anchor in heaven, we have unrestricted access to the throne of grace. This imagery takes me to John chapter 10, when Jesus tells the parable of the Good Shepherd. And then later in verse 9 of chapter 10, he explains this parable, and he says, I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. Today, let's be thankful for all that Jesus has done. He lowered himself. He took on human flesh. He was tempted in every way, was betrayed by 30 pieces of silver, arrested, wrongly convicted, sentenced to death, brutally beaten, and crucified and killed on a Roman cross, and rose on the third day and appeared to many. But that's not where the story ends, because Jesus is our pioneer. He's blazing the trail for us to follow. He ascended to heaven and is within the veil making intercession for us at the throne of grace. And to top it all off, he even has extra time to make a place for you and me in his Father's house. The book of Hebrews is so good and so rich and so deep. I'm just excited about this devotion, and I'm looking forward to getting into chapter 7 next week. On Sunday, though, Jeff is going to be taking us through the last plague and the first Passover in Exodus. I'm really excited about this sermon series that we've been going through too, and I hope you can join us at either 9 or 10:30. There's one more phrase at the end of chapter 6 in verse 20, and next week we'll finally get to that solid food of righteousness that the writer spoke about way back in chapter 5. That being Jesus, our high priest, forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Have a good day. I look forward to seeing you this Sunday, and I'll see you here next week on Friday. Bye-bye.